If you're listening to this, you may drift off before the end. So before you do, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Before we start, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, close your eyes. Just relax, take a deep breath and let everything go. Good night. Now we can begin. The night had a weight to it. A heavy stillness that settled over my house like a thick, invisible fog. The air was cold, but not the kind of cold that sent shivers down your spine. It was the kind that pressed in, wrapping itself around you, sinking into your skin like a presence you couldn't see. I lay in bed, eyes half lidded, listening to the quiet hum of the heater. Outside, the street was empty. No cars, no footsteps, not even the distant yawn of a passing train. Just silence, and then knock. Knock, two slow, deliberate knocks at my front door. My breath caught. The sound was so crisp, so perfectly timed, that for a moment I thought I had imagined it. My bedroom door was slightly ajar, and from where I lay, I could see the dark hallway stretching toward the front of the house. I waited, heart pounding against my ribs. Nothing. The knocks didn't come again. I turned onto my side, willing myself to ignore it. Maybe it had been the wind. Maybe a branch had scraped against the house. Or maybe knock, knock. My skin prickled. I sat up, pushing the blankets aside. The house felt different now, like a place I didn't quite belong in anymore. Every shadow in the corners seemed darker. The air felt thicker, pressing down on me with invisible hands. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand, and 3 o'clock, exactly. Slowly, I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, my bare feet pressing against the wooden floor. The boards creaked under my weight as I stood, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet house. I moved toward the front door, each step careful, measured. The closer I got, the more I felt it. That strange warmth seeping through the wood. Like someone had been standing there, their palm pressed against it, for too long. I hesitated, then, holding my breath, I looked through the peephole. Nothing. The porch was empty, bathed in the dim glow of the street lamp. The trees in my yard swayed gently, their bare branches clawing at the sky. But there was no one there. No one at all. I stood there for a long moment, my pulse a dull, rhythmic thud in my ears. Then, slowly, I reached for the lock, sliding it into place with a soft click. I told myself it was nothing. A prank, maybe, the house settling, my imagination running wild. But when I turned away, stepping back into the shadows of my home, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, watching, waiting, and somehow, I knew this wasn't the last time I'd hear that knock. The night didn't feel the same after that. Even though I had locked the door, even though I had checked the windows twice, even though I had tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Lying in bed, I kept glancing at the clock. 3:15. The red glow of the numbers felt unnatural, as if time itself was watching me. I closed my eyes, trying to slow my breathing. The house was still, wrapped in silence, but it was the wrong kind of silence. The type that felt full, as if something was pressing against it, waiting just beyond, and then knock. Knock. I bolted upright, my chest tightening. It was the same as before. 2 deliberate knocks, not loud, not aggressive. Just precise, measured, as if whoever was doing it wanted to be heard. But not seen. I swallowed hard. My body screamed at me to stay in bed, to pretend I hadn't heard it. But my curiosity clawed at me just as much as my fear did. Slowly, I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The air in the room felt colder now, as if something had seeped in through the walls. As I stood, I noticed something that made my stomach drop, the warmth. It was stronger this time, radiating from the front door like heat from a dying ember. Not enough to be overwhelming, just enough to be wrong. I crept toward the hallway, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. Every step felt heavier, like walking through water. The closer I got, the stronger that warmth became. By the time I reached the door, my palms were damp. I pressed my fingers against the wood, warm, too warm. I held my breath and leaned in, peering through the peephole. Nothing. The porch was empty again, bathed in the sickly glow of the street lamp. The trees swayed lazily, their skeletal branches casting shifting shadows across the pavement. But there was no one there. I exhaled, my breath fogging up the glass. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe stress was finally catching up with me. I had read about things like this: hypnagogic hallucinations, tricks of the mind when you're caught between sleep and wakefulness. But then I saw it. The doorknob was turning, my breath caught in my throat. I froze, my body going rigid as the metal handle twisted ever so slightly, just enough to let me know it was real. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. The doorknob rattled once, then stopped, and then silence. For a long moment I couldn't move. My body refused to function, my limbs locked in place by an icy, creeping dread. I forced myself to step forward, to press my ear against the door. Nothing. The warmth was gone now. The door felt normal, cool against my fingertips. I turned the lock again, just to be sure. Then, gripping the edge of the wall for balance, I made my way back to bed. But I didn't sleep, because I knew this wasn't over. The air in my bedroom felt heavy, thick with something unseen. Sleep refused to come, my mind looping over the same questions. Who was knocking? Why was the door warm? Why did it feel like something was waiting? I checked the clock again. 3:45. I should have been exhausted, but my body refused to relax. My skin tingled with an awareness I couldn't shake, as if I were being watched, like something had crept into the room while I wasn't looking. Then, just as my eyelids started to sag, knock, knock, I jolted upright, my breath catching in my throat. The air shifted, not physically, but in a way I could feel. The room seemed smaller, the walls pressing closer, the silence stretching into something unnatural. And then a voice, low, whispered, just outside the door, "Let me in." I felt a sharp chill roll down my spine. The voice was barely more than a breath, soft and dry, like the rasp of dead leaves scraping across pavement. It wasn't pleading, it wasn't demanding, it was simply stating, as if whoever, or whatever, was out there knew I was awake. I didn't move, I barely breathed. "I know you can hear me." My chest tightened, my fingers dug into the sheets, nails pressing into the fabric. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe this was sleep paralysis. Maybe I had finally lost it. Then the doorknob twisted again, not violently, not like someone trying to break in. No. This was slow, intentional, the soft metallic click of the latch shifting ever so slightly. I forced myself to move, my feet touching the floor before I even realized I had stood. My body was acting on instinct now, some primal urge screaming at me to take control. I crept toward the hallway, the floorboards cold beneath my bare feet. The voice didn't speak again. When I reached the door, I hesitated. My fingers hovered just above the wood. The warmth was back, stronger this time. My throat felt tight as I leaned forward, peering through the peephole. Darkness, not just an empty porch, actual darkness. A void where the world should have been. The street lamp that had always been there. Gone, the sidewalk, gone. The trees, the street, the stars, gone. All that remained was an endless, suffocating blackness. And then the darkness moved. A shape tall and thin shifted just beyond the door. No features, no eyes. Just an outline against the void. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering. A sharp tap against the door. Not a knock, something more deliberate, like a single fingernail dragging against the wood. I turned, nearly tripping over myself as I backed away. My phone, I needed my phone. I grabbed it off the nightstand, and, my hands shaking as I pressed the screen. The glow of the display felt unnatural in the heavy dark. No service, no Wi-Fi. The voice came again, closer this time. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." A cold sweat broke out across my skin. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to speak. "Who are you?" Silence. "Then you already know." The lights flickered, and then everything went black. Darkness swallowed the room in an instant. No flickering, no warning. just an abrupt and total void. I could hear my own breathing, sharp and uneven, the sound amplified in the silence. The air felt thick, pressing against my skin like a weighted blanket soaked in something unseen. I turned my phone over in my hands. The screen should have still been glowing. It had been on just seconds ago. But now, it was just a slab of glass, cold, dead. I forced myself to move, inching toward the window. If the power had gone out, the streetlights should still have been visible. But when I reached the curtains and pulled them back, nothing. No street, no houses, no distant glow of the city, just a wall of black. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering. And then knock, knock. The sound came not from the door this time, but the window. I turned sharply, my breath catching in my throat. There was no silhouette, no outline of a person standing there, just the sense that something was watching. I swallowed hard. Who are you? Silence. The air seemed to hum, not with sound, but with presence, something shifting in the unseen depths of the blackness. Then, a whisper, low and dry, "You're almost ready." I didn't wait. I bolted for the hallway, my feet barely making a sound on the floor. If this was some kind of power failure, maybe I could find a flashlight, or my steps faltered. The hallway was wrong. Longer, narrower, the walls stretched too far, twisting into an unfamiliar shape. The doors lining the corridor doors that should have led to my bathroom, my guest room, were different. Taller, older, I turned, glancing back toward my bedroom, only to find that the door was gone. The space where it should have been was now just a blank, featureless wall. The air pressed closer. I was not in my home anymore. Somewhere down the hall, another knock, soft, measured, and then the voice closer than before, as if it had stepped just behind me. "Come and see." A cold shiver crawled up my spine. I had a choice. I could stay here, frozen in this twisted version of my home, or I could move forward. I inhaled, forcing down the panic clawing at my throat, and then, step by step, I walked deeper into the dark. I moved forward, each step slow and deliberate, my breath shallow in the suffocating darkness. The hallway stretched ahead, impossibly long, the air thick with something unseen. My fingers grazed the wall, cold, rough, almost like old stone instead of the painted drywall I knew should have been there. I wasn't in my home anymore. The doors lining the hallway loomed tall and narrow, their wooden surfaces ancient and warped. Each one was different, some with rusted brass knobs, others with keyholes so deep they seemed to swallow the light. The doors felt wrong, as if they led to places that shouldn't exist. A low hum filled the air, faint, almost like breathing. I reached the first door on my right. The wood was darker than the others, its handle an iron ring. My fingers hesitated just above it. I didn't want to open it, but then knock, knock. The sound came from farther down the hall. I swallowed hard and kept moving, my pulse hammering in my ears. The second door was slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness oozed from the gap, as if the space beyond wasn't empty but alive. A faint whisper slipped through the crack, so soft I almost didn't hear it. "Turn back." I stiffened. My instinct screamed at me to listen, to run, to find a way out, but there was no turning back. The hallway stretched endlessly behind me, the entrance to my room gone. I reached the third door. Unlike the others, this one was pristine. White wood, a polished silver handle. Something about it felt familiar. My hand trembled as I reached for it. Then, suddenly, the hallway lurched. The walls groaned, shifting as if the entire structure were breathing. The doors shuddered, their hinges rattling. The air grew colder, thick with an unseen weight pressing down on me. And then, ahead, the door at the very end of the hall swung open on its own. Beyond it, there was no room, no floor, no walls, just blackness, deep, endless, a void, and something inside moved. A shadow, too tall, too thin, stepped forward. I didn't wait. I spun, running for the only door that seemed safe, the white one. My fingers closed around the handle, and I twisted. It wouldn't budge. The sound of something stepping closer filled the hallway, slow and deliberate. My breath hitched. I slammed my fist against the door, gripping the handle and wrenching it with all my strength. Behind me, knock, knock, not from a door this time, from inside the walls. A whisper slid against my ear, so close I could feel the breath of it. "You shouldn't have come." The door finally gave way, and I tumbled forward, falling, plunging into a darkness that swallowed me whole. I wasn't falling, I was drifting. The darkness swallowed me whole, wrapping around my body like thick, invisible smoke. There was no up or down, only the sensation of being weightless, suspended in an abyss that had no end. My heartbeat slowed, my breath shallow in the freezing void. Then, all at once, impact. I hit something solid, my body slamming onto a cold, unforgiving surface. A rush of air escaped my lungs as pain shot up my spine. I groaned, rolling onto my side, my fingers grazing the ground beneath me. It wasn't wood, not stone, not anything I could recognize. The surface was impossibly smooth, almost like glass, yet somehow soft under my touch. I forced my eyes open. Everything around me was black, not just dark empty. Except for the sky, above me there was no ceiling. No walls, just an endless stretch of stars. Not the kind I had seen in the night sky before, but strange, pulsating lights that flickered erratically. Some were too bright, some dim and fading, and others moving, shifting, watching. I pushed myself up, my breath clouding in the freezing air. My own reflection barely existed on the glass, like floor, a faint, distorted shadow of myself. Then I heard it, a sound. Knock, knock. I turned sharply. In the distance, something stood far too still. A shape human-like, but not quite. Its features were unclear, blurred as if it weren't fully real. Yet I could feel its eyes on me. I stepped back. It took a step forward. No, not a step. It glided. Like a film skipping forward, its movements were disjointed, unnatural. The knocking came again, but this time it wasn't in the distance. It was inside my head. A pressure, deep and suffocating, pressed against my skull. My vision wavered, the air thickening around me. Then a voice, soft, almost kind, "You've come too far." The figure lurched, its shape twisting. I ran. There was no path, no direction, just the endless black stretching in every direction. My feet barely made a sound against the smooth ground. The stars above flickered faster, as if reacting to my fear. And then a door, standing alone in the void, just ahead of me. It was the same white door from the hallway, the only one that had seemed real. I reached for the handle, my fingers brushing against the cool metal. Behind me, the figure let out a sound, a low, inhuman sigh, like something exhaling its final breath. I twisted the handle, the door swung open, blinding light exploded from within. I barely had time to react before it pulled me in, and the world around me vanished. I hit the ground with a force that rattled my bones. For a moment, everything was still, just the distant hum of silence pressing into my ears. My body ached, my breath shallow as I forced myself onto my elbows, blinking against the blinding white light around me. Where was I? The last thing I remembered was the door, the smooth glass, like floor, that thing in the darkness. But now, I was lying on a carpet. The fibers were coarse under my palms, the scent of dust thick in the air. I pushed myself up, my body protesting, and looked around. I was in a house, but not my house. The living room stretched before me, lit by the dull glow of an old-fashioned floor lamp. The walls were a soft cream color, lined with antique paintings, landscapes, frozen in time. The furniture looked expensive but untouched, like no one had ever truly lived here. A thick, eerie quiet settled over the place, too perfect, too still. Something was wrong. I rose to my feet, my heartbeat thrumming against my ribs. I wasn't injured, but I felt off, like a part of me had been left behind in that endless void. My fingers twitched as I reached for my pocket out of instinct, but my phone was gone. The air was too cold, the house too lifeless, and then knock, knock. I stiffened. The sound came from the front door. I turned slowly. The door was just ahead, large and old, with an iron handle and a brass keyhole. Through the frosted glass window, I could see a shadow on the other side, tall, unmoving. I stepped back. The knocking came again. Knock, knock. I swallowed hard, my breath coming faster. Then I noticed something else, the clock on the wall. A large, ornate grandfather clock stood in the corner, its pendulum swinging far too slow, as if time itself was struggling to move. The hands read 3 o'clock, exactly, the same time the knocking had started back in my apartment. My stomach clenched. I took another step back. My instinct screamed not to open that door, but something inside me, the same reckless, terrified curiosity that had brought me here in the first place, itched to look through the keyhole. Just a quick glance. I moved forward, slow, careful. My fingers barely brushed the wood before I leaned down, my eye aligning with the keyhole. At first I saw nothing, just blackness, but then a flash of something red, like fabric. Someone was standing just beyond the door, wearing a deep red coat. My breath caught. Then the whisper came, soft, right against the door, "You shouldn't be here." My pulse slammed against my ears. I stumbled backward just as the entire house shifted, the air turning thick and suffocating, the walls groaning as if they were alive. The lights flickered wildly, and from deep within the house I heard a door creak open. Not the front door. Something inside. I wasn't alone, and whatever else was here, it had just woken up. The house was breathing. I could hear it. Soft, rhythmic creaks echoing from the walls, like something deep within the foundation was alive. The air had changed, thick with a scent I couldn't place, like damp wood and something metallic. I stood frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears, my eyes locked on the front door. "You shouldn't be here." The whisper still lingered in the air, but the figure in the red coat was gone. And behind me another door had opened, a faint creak, a shift in the air. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. At the end of the hallway, past the dim glow of the antique lamps, a door stood slightly ajar. It hadn't been opened before. I was sure of it. A sliver of darkness stretched beyond the opening, the kind of blackness that swallowed light whole. The walls groaned again. Somewhere inside that room, something moved. Not footsteps, not a voice, just a slow, dragging sound, like fabric brushing against the floor. I did not want to go in. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run out of this strange house, to get as far away as possible. But something wasn't right. If I left, where would I go? This wasn't my apartment. This wasn't anywhere I recognized. And the knocking, it had followed me here. If I left the house, would I end up somewhere worse? I swallowed hard and forced my feet forward. Step by step, I approached the open door. The darkness inside felt heavy, like a thick fog curling at the edges of the wooden floorboards. I couldn't see much, just the outline of a room, faint shapes in the shadows. I reached out and slowly pushed the door open. The hinges let out a soft, whining creak. The room beyond was wrong. It was a bedroom, but not like any I had ever seen before. The bed was perfectly made, its white sheets tucked so tight they looked untouched. A wooden rocking chair sat in the corner, moving ever so slightly, as if someone had just gotten up. The air was freezing, my breath curling in front of me like mist, and on the wall a mirror. Tall, old, its glass slightly warped. I stepped closer, my reflection flickering in the dim light. Something about it felt off. My face stared back at me, pale and tense, my dark eyes wide with unease. But the longer I looked, the more I noticed something was wrong. The reflection was too slow. When I blinked, it blinked a second later. When I lifted my hand, it stayed still. My breath hitched, and then it moved on its own, not mirroring me, not following my actions. My reflection tilted its head, and then, in a voice that wasn't mine, it whispered, "You should have never knocked." I stumbled back just as the mirror shattered. The rocking chair stopped moving. The bed groaned, the sheets shifting like something beneath them was moving. And from the hallway, knock, knock. I whipped around, my stomach twisting. The front door, again, 3 o'clock. Exactly. The knocking had followed me here, and now so had something else. The silence after the knocking was worse than the sound itself. I stood in the dimly lit hallway, heart pounding, ears straining to catch the slightest noise beyond the door. But there was nothing, no footsteps retreating, no whisper through the keyhole, just the absence of sound, thick and unnatural, pressing down on the house like a held breath. I backed away from the door. Behind me, the bedroom still felt wrong. The mirror was shattered, shards of glass reflecting distorted, broken slivers of my face. The sheets on the bed were not flat anymore. They bulged upward in the shape of something beneath them, something curled, waiting. I refused to check. Instead, I turned toward the hallway window. Only there wasn't supposed to be a window here. When I first walked through this hallway, there had been nothing but old wallpaper and a rusted picture frame, a black-and white photograph of a family with blur-out faces. But now a tall, narrow window stretched from floor to ceiling. It hadn't been there before, and outside there was no street, no trees, no sky, just a dark field stretching endlessly, illuminated by a moon that was too close, a swollen, pulsing mass of silver light that bathed everything in an eerie glow. And then I saw it, the figure in the distance, standing still, watching. It wasn't moving, but something about it felt wrong. Its proportions were off, limbs just a little too long, head tilted at a slight angle, as if it were listening instead of looking. I took a shaky breath, stepping closer to the glass. The window was ice, cold under my fingertips. Outside, the figure hadn't moved. Not an inch, but something had changed. Its shadow. It was longer, stretching toward the house, inching closer, even though the figure itself was still far away. A trick of the moonlight. I blinked, and in that fraction of a second, it was closer. No footsteps. No transition. One moment it had been far away. Now it was standing directly outside the window. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The figure wasn't human. Its face was blank. Not empty, not covered, just unfinished, like something had started shaping it, but never completed the job. And then it knocked on the glass, twice, slow, deliberate. I couldn't move. It tilted its head further. And then it did something impossible. It turned around, only its back wasn't facing me. Even as it rotated, the front of its body never left my sight. It had no back, just a front that followed me no matter the angle. Knock, knock, the front door, again. The knocking had found me, and now so had they. The knocks rang out again. Two slow, deliberate strikes against the front door. Knock, knock, and yet my eyes remained glued to the window, to it. The figure still stood outside, motionless. A frozen thing bathed in the too close glow of the swollen moon. Its face, if I could call it that, didn't change. Just a smooth, featureless expanse where eyes, a mouth, anything should be. But it was watching me. I felt it. I forced myself to move, stumbling away from the window, barely breathing. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered, walls tilting in slightly, like the house itself was closing in on me. Knock, knock. The front door shouldn't be open. I had locked it. I was sure of it. But as I turned the corner, the chain dangled loose. The bolt was unlatched. The door was open. Not wide, just a sliver, just enough to reveal a strip of the outside world beyond. Only it wasn't my street. Where there should have been sidewalks, mailboxes, the rusting old street lamp that buzzed on foggy nights, there was nothing. A void stretching endlessly, black as ink. No stars, no ground, just emptiness. A pressure built behind my ribs. I reached out, shaking, and grabbed the edge of the door, and something pushed back. Not a hand, not fingers. Just force, something unseen, something weightless but there, pressed against the other side of the door, keeping it from closing. I pushed harder. It pushed back. A slow, deliberate resistance, and then a whisper, not from the door. From behind me, I spun around. The hallway was empty, but the window, the figure was gone. Only its shadow remained, stretched impossibly long across the field outside. I didn't wait. I shoved the door with all my strength, and this time it slammed shut. I locked it. I bolted it. I pushed the heavy wooden dresser in front of it just to be sure. Then I backed away, hands shaking. Silence for the first time all night. No knocking. No whispers. Just the distant, low hum of something I didn't want to think about in the walls. I turned back toward the hallway, and then I heard it. A sound that made my stomach twist, my throat tighten. The front door, behind the heavy dresser, behind the bolts and locks and chains, it creaked open. The locks hadn't mattered. The bolts hadn't mattered, and I knew, deep in my gut, closing the door again wouldn't help, because whatever was outside was already inside. The air inside my house felt different now. It had weight, a pressure, thick and clinging, like the atmosphere just before a thunderstorm, except there was no storm. No wind, no rain, just the quiet breath of something unseen, something that had stepped through the door without opening it. I didn't turn around. I couldn't, because I knew. If I did, I would see it, not with my eyes, with my reflection. The mirror in the hallway stood at the far end, a long, antique thing with a silvered surface that had started to warp over the years. My grandmother had owned it before me. She always claimed mirrors were just windows facing the wrong way. I never understood what she meant, but I did now, because in that warped silver glass I saw it, standing right behind me, a shape tall, unmoving, featureless, yet somehow familiar, its head tilted ever so slightly, as if acknowledging me, as if it had been waiting for me to see it. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like lead. My own reflection was still there, too, but it wasn't right. The version of me in the mirror looked slower, delayed, like an old video playing just a second too late. When I blinked, it didn't. When I lifted my arm, it hesitated, and then moved on its own, not copying me, acting on its own. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. My breath came out in short, uneven gasps. The thing behind me, the one in the mirror, moved closer, not toward me, toward my reflection, and my reflection just stood there, waiting. I wanted to run. I should have, but something held me there, something deeper than fear. A whisper, not out loud, inside my own mind, "Don't look away." The air turned ice cold. My reflection grinned. I didn't, but it did. A slow, stretching grin, too wide, too unnatural. It lifted its hand. I didn't. The hand pressed against the glass, long fingers splayed wide. The thing behind it, the tall, silent figure, pressed its hand against the other side, palm to palm, a dark, shifting outline seeping through my reflection's skin. My stomach twisted. I tried to move. My reflection didn't let me, just a little longer. The whisper murmured inside my skull. The grin widened. I could see its teeth now, my own teeth, except they weren't mine. They were sharper, longer, like something had been waiting behind my reflection's face for years, and now, finally, it had a chance to come forward. Almost there, the voice crooned, "No, no, no, no." I forced myself to look away. The lights flickered. A burst of static rang through the air like a television losing its signal, and when I turned back, the mirror was empty. No reflection, no figure, just an old, warped pane of silver glass, and yet I could still feel it. The pressure in my own skin, like something had stepped through and left the door open. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I must have drifted in and out, trapped in that uneasy place between waking and dreaming, where thoughts bleed into hallucinations and time loses meaning. I remember the house groaning in the night, the old pipes expanding and contracting, as if something inside the walls was breathing. But the worst part wasn't the sounds, it was the feeling, the undeniable sensation that I was no longer alone. Not in the way you might expect, no figures lurking in the shadows, no whispering voices crawling beneath the floorboards. It was worse than that. The house itself felt wrong, like it didn't recognize me anymore, like I was a stranger. The bed beneath me felt off, the sheets, the pillows, even the creak of the wooden frame. All of it was just slightly different from the bed I had fallen asleep in. The air smelled faintly of something unfamiliar, not rotten, not foul, just foreign. I sat up, rubbing my face, trying to shake the feeling. The walls were still there, the furniture, the old bookshelf, half filled with novels I never finished. My apartment was still my apartment, but something had changed, or maybe I had changed. I stood up, moving toward the hallway. The mirror still hung at the far end, its warped silvered glass catching the dim glow of the streetlights outside. I hesitated. A cold, twisting unease settled in my gut. The events of last night flashed through my mind, my reflection not moving with me. That tall, shadowed figure standing behind it, that smile. I swallowed hard. I needed to see. I needed to make sure. Slowly, I stepped forward. The wooden floor creaked beneath my feet, the sound stretching through the silence like an old house sighing in its sleep. I reached the mirror. I looked, and my reflection looked back. Perfectly normal. I let out a slow, shaky breath. Nothing was wrong. Nothing had changed. I was just imagining things. The unease loosened its grip until I noticed something. Something so small, so subtle, I almost missed it. The door behind me. The reflection showed it wide open. I turned around. It was closed. A thick, suffocating silence filled the air. I turned back to the mirror. The door in the reflection was still open, and someone was standing in the doorway, watching me, a shape. Tall, unmoving, no features, no face, just a presence looming in the threshold of my own home. I spun around. Nothing, the door was shut. The hallway was empty. But when I turned back to the mirror, the figure was closer. Not in the doorway anymore, right behind me. My stomach twisted into a knot. I backed away, pulse hammering against my ribs. This wasn't just paranoia. It wasn't just a trick of the light. Something was wrong with my reflection. Something had stepped through the door last night, and now my own home didn't know me anymore. I backed away from the mirror, my breath shallow, my skin clammy with cold sweat. The figure was gone, but the feeling remained. That unnerving certainty that something had crossed over. Something had entered my home last night, and I had no way of knowing if it ever left. I turned away from the mirror, refusing to look at it any longer. My apartment felt different now, the air thicker, heavier, as if the walls were watching me. I stepped into the hallway. Stopped, my stomach twisted into a knot. I was facing my bedroom door, but it wasn't my bedroom. The door was the same dull wood, the handle the same tarnished brass, but something about it was off. Too tall, too narrow, like someone had taken my real bedroom door and stretched it just slightly out of proportion. A shiver crawled down my spine. I reached for the handle, turned it. The door swung open, and I froze. My room was gone. This wasn't my room. The layout was different. The furniture was all wrong. Instead of my bed, there was an old iron-framed cot with sheets that looked crisp and untouched, as if no one had ever slept there. Instead of my desk, there was a small wooden table, its surface littered with yellowed pages and broken fountain pens. The air smelled faintly of dust and old paper. The walls weren't mine either. They weren't even the same color. This wasn't my apartment. I took a slow, hesitant step inside. The floor creaked beneath my weight. A shiver crawled down my arms. I didn't recognize anything in here, but everything in the room recognized me. I could feel it, a quiet, heavy presence pressing against my skin, watching from the edges of my vision. I took another step, and the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, heart hammering, and grabbed the handle. It wouldn't budge. The air thickened. The silence grew heavier. Then, from the far side of the room, something moved. A whisper of sound, soft and dry, like pages turning in a book. I turned, a shadow, not a person, not even a shape. Just a smudge of darkness, pooling in the farthest corner of the room, where the light couldn't quite reach. The whispering grew louder, pages turning, shifting, rustling. I stepped back, pulse slamming against my ribs. Something was in here with me, something that had been waiting, The whispering stopped. Silence. The air felt thick enough to drown in. Then a voice, low, soft, coming from the shadows. "You don't belong here." My throat closed. My legs locked in place. The voice was wrong. Not human, not electronic. Something in between. "You shouldn't have opened the door." A chill ripped down my spine. The air pressed against me. The room tilted, or maybe I did. I grabbed the handle again, wrenched it. It turned, the door flung open, and I stumbled out into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind me. I braced against the wood, gasping for breath. My heart was a frantic drumbeat in my ears. For a long moment, nothing happened. No sounds, no movement, nothing. I turned, looked at the door, the wrong door. I knew, without a doubt, that if I opened it again, the room would be gone. The real question was, would something else be waiting instead? I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that room, that wrong version of my own bedroom. The shadow in the corner, the whisper of pages turning, the voice that wasn't human. I sat on my couch, arms wrapped around my knees, staring at the front door, waiting because I knew it would happen again. The knock. It always did. But tonight, it felt different. Everything felt different. The air in my apartment was too still, like the whole place was holding its breath. Even the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen had stopped, leaving behind a silence so deep it pressed against my ears. I checked the time on my wall clock. 3:28. My stomach twisted. I clenched my hands into fists, willing myself to stay calm. Maybe if I didn't react, if I didn't open the door, if I didn't even acknowledge the knock, maybe it would stop. I took a slow breath, another, then knock, knock. My pulse slammed against my ribs. I squeezed my eyes shut. I wasn't going to look, not this time, but then a new sound, scraping. A slow, deliberate dragging sound, right outside my door. My breath hitched. The knock had always been the same, a pattern, a signal. But this was different. Something had changed. I reached for my phone, fingers trembling, checked the time again, 3:30. A shiver crawled down my spine. I turned my head toward the peephole, but I hesitated. Did I really want to see what was out there? The scraping sound stopped. A few seconds of silence, then tap, not a knock, not a fist, something else. Something sharp, a single tap against the wood, right next to the peephole, like it knew I was about to look. My blood turned to ice. I jerked away, breath shallow. I couldn't stay here, not tonight. Not after that door, not after that voice. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and I left. The elevator ride down felt endless. The air inside was thick and stale. My own reflection in the mirrored walls looked paler than usual. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe I'd just imagined it. Maybe it was a stray animal, a trick of my tired mind. Maybe the voice I'd heard in that wrong room had been a hallucination. The elevator doors slid open. The lobby was empty. The night doorman was missing from his usual spot. I stepped outside. The city air was cold and damp, the scent of rain clinging to the pavement. For a brief moment, I felt relief. I wasn't in my apartment anymore. I wasn't trapped in that suffocating silence. I took a deep breath. Then I turned and froze. Across the street, standing beneath the flickering glow of a street lamp, a figure. Dressed in black, tall, still, watching me. I couldn't see its face. I didn't want to. I turned away. Started walking, fast. The night was too quiet. No cars, no voices. Just the soft echo of my own footsteps. I glanced over my shoulder. The figure was gone. I walked faster. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to be somewhere else. The streets felt wrong, not empty, not silent, wrong. Like something was just beyond my vision, just beyond my understanding, bending the world in ways I couldn't quite grasp. I had left my apartment in a hurry, my heart still hammering from that tap on the door. But now, standing beneath a flickering streetlight, I wasn't sure where to go. A hotel, too expensive. A friend's place, none close enough. Back inside, absolutely not. A cold wind swept down the street, carrying the faint scent of something rotten. My stomach twisted at the smell, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly lost. I needed somewhere safe, somewhere normal, somewhere I could breathe, and then I saw it. A small 24-hour diner on the corner, its neon sign buzzing weakly against the darkness. I didn't hesitate. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. Warm air, the smell of coffee, the low murmur of a radio playing in the background. It felt normal, safe. I let out a slow breath and found a booth near the window. An older waitress with tired eyes shuffled over, notebook in hand. "You okay, hon?" she asked, glancing at me. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Just tired. She gave me a look like she'd heard that before, then scribbled something down. "Coffee, yeah," I said. "Please." She walked off, and I slumped in my seat. The diner was mostly empty. A man in a dark coat sat at the counter, stirring his coffee absently. A couple in the far booth whispered to each other, heads close together. The clock on the wall read 3:45. I exhaled slowly, willing my body to relax. It was fine. I was fine. Then I glanced at the window, and my stomach dropped. Outside, across the street, a man was standing there. Still, motionless, watching. The streetlight above him flickered, casting his face in and out of shadow. But something about him was off. His proportions, the way he stood, too straight, too rigid, like he was waiting. A sudden wave of nausea hit me, and I tore my gaze away. I reached for my coffee, hands shaking slightly as I lifted it to my lips. "Calm down, breathe, it's just a guy. It's just the bell jingled. Someone had come in." I looked up, and my entire body went cold. It was him, the man from outside. He was standing just inside the door, his dark coat hanging stiffly around him. His eyes, I couldn't see them. They were shadowed, obscured, but I could feel them on me. I forced myself to stay still. The waitress didn't react. The man at the counter didn't react. The couple didn't react, like he wasn't even there. Like I was the only one who could see him. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. He moved, not toward me, toward the window, and then he sat down, directly across from me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. He tilted his head slightly, as if studying me. And then, in a voice that sounded like cracking ice, he spoke. "You left." A chill ran down my spine. His voice was wrong, flat, hollow, like he was repeating words he didn't quite understand. My hands clenched under the table. "I don't know what you're talking about." I forced out. The man didn't blink, didn't move. His lips barely parted when he spoke again. "You were supposed to stay." The words crawled over my skin, too slow, too deliberate. I swallowed hard. Somehow, I found the courage to stand. I have to go," I muttered, reaching for my wallet. The man tilted his head the other way, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Then, finally, he moved. Slow, too slow. He raised one hand and pressed his palm against the window. The second he touched it, every light in the diner flickered. The radio cut out, and a low, static-filled whisper filled the air. I ran. The moment I stepped outside, the cold hit me like a wall. I didn't stop, didn't turn back. I just ran, and as I did, I heard something, a sound I shouldn't have heard. A sound that shouldn't have been possible. A knock, 2 sharp knocks, but they weren't coming from my apartment door. They were coming from inside the diner, from the window, and when I finally turned around, the man was gone. But his handprint was still there, a perfect blackened mark on the glass. 20 parts remain. I didn't stop running. The streets blurred past me, empty and silent, except for the wind howling between the buildings. The cold bit into my skin, but I barely felt it. All I could hear was the echo of those 2 knocks, sharp, deliberate, inside the diner. I wasn't safe. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stop. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw a familiar building. A gas station, its bright fluorescent lights buzzing against the darkness. It wasn't much, but it was open, occupied, normal. I stumbled toward it, breathless. The sliding doors hissed open as I stepped inside. The sharp scent of motor oil and stale coffee filled my nose. A bored-looking cashier sat behind the counter, flipping through a magazine. He barely glanced at me. A single customer stood near the back, browsing the refrigerated drinks. The gas station felt too quiet, too still. I hesitated, my pulse still hammering, then made my way toward the small restroom in the back. I needed a moment, needed to breathe. The door creaked as I pushed it open. The bathroom was small. A single stall, a grimy sink, a mirror. I stepped up to the sink and turned on the water, cold. I splashed some onto my face, trying to steady my breathing. It was fine, I was fine. I lifted my head and froze. My reflection wasn't moving. I blinked. The face in the mirror didn't. My stomach twisted. It wasn't possible. It wasn't. The reflection suddenly tilted its head, a second too late. Like it was catching up, like it wasn't really me. A slow, creeping dread spread through my chest. I lifted a hand. The reflection lifted its hand, but something was wrong. The fingers too long, just slightly, just enough to make my skin crawl. I took a step back. The reflection stayed where it was. A silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then it smiled. I didn't. The mouth in the mirror stretched wide, showing too many teeth. A chill ran down my spine. I turned, ready to run, but the bathroom door was locked. I hadn't locked it. My breath came fast, shallow. I looked back at the mirror, and the reflection was closer. Not just a little. Halfway out of the glass. A hand pressed against the surface from the inside, its fingers blackened like soot. I stumbled back, slamming against the stall. The thing in the mirror was stepping forward. It wasn't a reflection anymore. It was real. Its body twisted as it emerged, unnatural. Its limbs unfolding like a puppet without strings. I fumbled for the door handle, yanking at it desperately. Locked. I could hear it behind me, moving. Too close. My fingers shook as I grabbed my phone, my breath ragged. The time read 4 o'clock. I turned, and the mirror was empty. The thing was gone, but the stall door behind me, it was open, and something was breathing inside. I didn't wait to see what it was. I slammed my shoulder against the bathroom door, once, twice. On the third hit, it burst open. I stumbled out into the gas station, nearly crashing into a shelf of snacks. The cashier finally looked up. "You all right, man?" he asked, frowning. I turned, my chest heaving. The bathroom was normal. The door swinging slightly, the mirror unbroken, like nothing had happened. But I knew what I saw. And then a soft knock. Two, from inside the stall. I didn't say a word. I just ran. 19 parts remain. I didn't stop running until I was far, far away from the gas station. The city felt too open, too exposed, too easy for something to watch me. I needed shelter, somewhere enclosed. Somewhere I could lock a door and catch my breath. That's when I saw it. A hotel. The neon sign flickered above the entrance, humming faintly in the cold night air. It wasn't one of those big chain hotels, just a small, old building tucked between taller ones. Its lobby windows glowing dimly. It looked empty, but not abandoned. I pushed through the glass doors. The inside smelled like dust and stale carpet. A clerk stood behind the front desk, an older man with sunken eyes. He didn't react when I stepped in. Just stared at a small TV on the counter, the screen flickering with static. "Need a room?" he asked without looking at me. His voice was flat. I hesitated. Something about this place felt off. But I needed to rest. "Yeah," I said, "just for the night." The clerk nodded, reaching under the counter. For a moment, his hand froze like he'd forgotten what he was doing. Then, slowly, he slid a key toward me. Room 13. A cold prickle crawled up my spine. I glanced at the old-fashioned key. The brass was tarnished, the number barely legible. Something in my gut told me to leave, but I ignored it. I took the key and headed toward the stairs. The hallway was empty. The carpet muted my footsteps as I walked past the other doors. Every single one was closed. No sounds from inside, no lights seeping through the cracks, like I was the only guest. When I reached room 13, I hesitated again. The door looked wrong, not broken, not damaged, just off, slightly too tall, slightly too thin, like it wasn't meant for a person to walk through. The brass doorknob was cold. I turned it. The door swung open without a sound. The room was empty, no furniture. No bed, just a single mirror on the far wall. My pulse stopped. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't a hotel room. It was something else. I turned to leave. The door slammed shut. The lights flickered. And then a soft, deliberate knock. 2 knocks, from the inside of the mirror. I didn't turn around. I didn't move. A cold breath whispered against my ear, "You're in the wrong place." I lunged for the door, yanking at the handle, locked. The lights flickered again. In the split second of darkness, I saw it. A figure standing in the mirror. Tall, too tall. Its arms hung wrong, like they were being pulled by invisible strings. And its head, it was tilting. Like it was listening, like it was waiting. A knock, too. This time, right behind me. I didn't scream. I didn't look back. I just ran straight at the door, slamming my shoulder against it. The lock clicked. The door burst open, and I stumbled out into the hallway. The lights in the hotel were gone. Everything was dark. Everything was wrong. I turned back. The door to room 13 was gone. Just an empty wall. No keyhole. No handle, like the room had never existed. I stood there, my chest heaving, staring at the blank space where the door should have been. The air felt heavy. Then, from somewhere down the dark hallway, 2 knocks. Soft, waiting. I ran. 18 parts remain. I ran until my legs ached, until my breath came in ragged gasps, and the cold night air burned my lungs. The hotel was behind me, gone. Maybe it had never really been there at all, but the city around me felt just as wrong. The streets were too quiet. No honking cars, no people walking home from late night shifts. Even the air itself seemed still, like the world was holding its breath. That's when I heard it, a low, mechanical rumble. Headlights cut through the fog ahead, bright and unnatural. A bus, an old one, the kind you don't see anymore, with rounded edges and peeling paint. Its windows were black, impossible to see through. It pulled up beside me with a hiss. The doors slid open. The driver was shadowed, his uniform crisp but too clean, like it had never been worn before. He didn't say anything. He just waited for me. I should have walked away, but my feet moved on their own. I stepped onto the bus. The doors hissed shut behind me. The inside smelled of dust and old leather. Rows of empty seats stretched back into the darkness. I looked around. No passengers, no signs. Only a single flickering light above the aisle, casting long, shifting shadows. The driver didn't ask for fare, didn't check a schedule. He just gripped the wheel and pressed down on the gas. The bus lurched forward. The city lights blurred outside the window as we drove. Something was wrong. The buildings weren't changing, the same streetlights, the same intersections, like we weren't moving at all. Like we were stuck in the same moment, looping over and over. I swallowed hard, shifting in my seat. That's when I noticed the passenger, at the very back. I hadn't seen him before, but now he was there, sitting perfectly still. His face was hidden in shadow, his hands folded neatly in his lap. I felt his eyes on me. Even though I couldn't see them, I turned away. The driver hummed under his breath, a low, tuneless sound. I glanced up at the rearview mirror. It was angled down at me, even though it shouldn't have been, like the driver was watching. I gripped the edge of my seat. Something about this bus felt alive. The hum of the engine wasn't just a sound. It was a pulse, a heartbeat. The street outside blurred faster. We weren't stopping, not slowing, not turning. I stood up. The driver's eyes snapped to me in the mirror. For the first time he spoke. "You should sit down." His voice was flat, too calm. I ignored him. I moved toward the front, gripping the nearest seat for balance. I need to get off. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel. "We're not there yet." His knuckles were pale, like he was straining to hold on. I turned toward the doors. There was no emergency exit, no button to open them. only a tiny sign beside the handle. No stops until destination. I turned back. The man in the last row was closer. I hadn't heard him move, but he was now one row ahead of where he'd been. I took a step back. The driver spoke again, not much longer now. The bus shuddered, the lights flickered. And outside the window, the city was gone. No buildings, no streets, just endless, shifting darkness. I ran for the doors. I pounded on them, trying to force them open. The driver's side. And then 2 knocks. Not on the door, behind me. I turned. The passenger was inches away. A shape, too tall, too thin. Its mouth stretched too wide. It leaned in, whispering, "Sit down." I threw myself at the doors, and then they opened. I tumbled out onto hard pavement, the bus roaring away into the darkness. I gasped, rolling onto my back. I was in the middle of a road. No street signs, no lights, no city in sight. Just a single gas station in the distance. I pushed myself to my feet. The neon sign above the gas station flickered. I squinted at the name. It was the same gas station I had left hours ago. I hadn't escaped. I had only looped back. From somewhere in the shadows, 2 soft knocks. 17 parts remain. The gas station's neon sign flickered, buzzing like a dying insect. I stood on the cracked pavement, staring at the familiar place. I had been here before. Somehow, after everything, I had looped back. The bus was gone. The road stretched into endless darkness behind me, and then knock, knock, a slow, deliberate sound. Not from the gas station, not from behind me, from somewhere ahead. Beyond the station, past the empty road, there was a house. It shouldn't have been there. I was sure it hadn't been. But now it sat in the distance, waiting. A house with no windows. The path leading to it was uneven, cracked with weeds curling through the cement. The house itself was older than it should be. Faded wooden slats stretched along its frame, and the roof sagged at the edges. But there were no windows, only a door, tall, dark, waiting. I swallowed hard, stepping forward. The closer I got, the heavier the air became. Like something was pushing against me, like the world itself was trying to hold me back. I reached the porch. The wood creaked beneath my weight. The door had no handle, just a small metal slot, low enough that I had to kneel to look inside. A sliver of darkness stared back at me. Then a whisper, not words, just breathe. I stumbled back, heart hammering. And then knock, knock. I turned. The gas station was gone. The road was gone. Only the house remained. Only the door, and the whispering voice beyond it. I should have run, but I didn't. I raised my hand and knocked. Twice, the breath behind the slot hitched, like something had been waiting for me to do that. The door swung open. Beyond it was nothing, not a hallway, not a room, just a vast, endless void, and something inside of it. Something that had been there all along, watching, waiting. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. A voice whispered, low and careful. "You knocked," and then a hand reached out. I turned to run, but the porch was gone. The ground beneath me vanished. And I was falling into the dark, falling into the house with no windows. And just before everything went black, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic knocking from inside my own chest, like something was knocking back, like something had finally let itself in. I woke up in a place I did not recognize. The air was damp, thick with the scent of stone and dust. Somewhere above me, water dripped in slow, steady intervals. Drip, drip, drip. My body felt heavy, like something was pressing me down. Like I wasn't supposed to move, but I did. I forced my arms to lift, my legs to shift, and that's when I saw it. Saw him, the other me. He stood just a few feet away. Same height, same hair, same face, but something was wrong. His skin was off like wax that had melted and then hardened wrong. His eyes were empty, like 2 holes punched through paper. And his mouth, it wasn't a mouth at all. Just a thin, dark line stretching too far across his face. I froze. He did not blink. He did not move. But somehow, I knew he was waiting for me to speak, waiting for me to do something wrong. The walls around us were curved, stone, old and uneven, stretching into darkness in every direction. I wasn't in the house anymore. I wasn't anywhere I could recognize. It felt like I was inside something alive. The air pulsed, the walls seemed to breathe, and still, the other me watched, waiting. I took a slow step forward. He did not move. I took another. He took the same step, perfectly synchronized, like a reflection, like something that had been practicing. My breath hitched. I raised my hand, so did he. I tilted my head, so did he. But then I stopped, and he didn't. His head kept tilting, slowly, further and further, until the angle was impossible. His neck bent like soft wax. And then he took a step toward me, a step I didn't take. My blood ran cold, because this thing, it wasn't me. It had just been pretending, and now it didn't have to pretend anymore. It moved fast, faster than I thought it could. I stumbled backward, slamming into the stone wall behind me. The other me kept coming. Its two long fingers stretched toward my face, its jaw slowly splitting open. And inside wasn't a mouth at all. It was a door. A small, dark doorway that led into nothingness. And I knew if it touched me, I would become it. Or worse, it would become me. I ran. My feet slammed against the uneven ground, the stone floor curving downward. I didn't know where I was going. Didn't know if I was heading deeper into this place or finding a way out. But I ran, and behind me, I heard the sound of something chasing. Something that moved just like me, but faster. I turned a corner, gasping for air, and then I saw it. A door. Not the kind the other me had in its mouth. Not the kind that led into darkness. A real door. Tall, wooden, and waiting. I reached for the handle, but just before I touched it, knock. Knock, the sound came from inside. I froze, because something on the other side was knocking. Like it was waiting for me to answer. Like it had been expecting me all along. I had no choice. I turned the handle and stepped through. The door slammed shut behind me. I spun around. The stone hallway was gone. The other me was gone. Instead, I was standing back in my apartment. Back in my hallway, like nothing had happened. Except I knew something had. Because when I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I saw the other me smiling back. And the door I had just stepped through, it was still there. Sitting in my living room, tall, dark, and waiting. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to work. "Who are you?" I whispered. The man in the mirror's mouth didn't move. But I still heard the words like they were spoken inside my head. "I am you." The voice wasn't mine. It was close, but it was off, distorted, like someone trying to remember how I used to sound. I shook my head. "No, you're not." The reflection cocked its head again, watching me. Then it spoke again, but this time its lips actually moved. "You left the door open." My stomach dropped. The door, the one in my living room. I turned my head slowly. It was still there, still shut, but something was wrong. I could see the shadow beneath it, a thin, dark sliver of movement. Something was standing on the other side, waiting, listening, and the more I stared, the more I realized the door was unlocked. I moved before I could think. I lunged toward the handle, grabbing it with both hands. But the moment my fingers wrapped around the metal, something grabbed me back. Not from the other side, not from the door, from the mirror. A hand shot through the glass, a perfect copy of mine. But it was wrong, too long, too smooth, like something had studied my hand but never really had one of its own. It clamped around my wrist with inhuman strength. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to yank away, but the grip was unbreakable. The man in the mirror stepped forward. His entire body, pushing through the glass like it, was made of liquid. And I saw, for the first time, what he really was. He looked like me, but stretched, elongated in ways that weren't possible. His face was still my face, but the skin was translucent. Dark veins pulsed underneath, moving like shadows trapped beneath ice. And his mouth, it opened, slowly, wider than a mouth should. A grin that split his face in two, and inside there were no teeth. No tongue, just darkness, a vast empty void. and I knew he was trying to pull me in. I thrashed, fought, tried to pull away, but the grip tightened. The mirror had turned to something else, something like quicksand. And the harder I struggled, the deeper my arms sank into the glass. I could feel it, the cold emptiness on the other side. A place that wasn't supposed to exist. A place he wanted to drag me into. Forever. The door behind me creaked. The real door, the one that led to that other place. I could hear something pushing against it. Something trying to get through. And in that moment, I realized I had a choice. Stay here and be pulled into the mirror, or open the door and take my chances with whatever was waiting on the other side. I didn't hesitate. I turned, I grabbed the handle, and I threw the door open. Darkness, that's all I saw. A deep, impossible blackness stretched beyond the doorway, like stepping into an ocean with no bottom. And I had no time to think, because behind me, the mirror man lunged. I jumped through the door, and everything vanished. I wasn't in my apartment anymore. I wasn't in anywhere anymore. I was falling, through the dark, through the empty. And somewhere in the distance, I could still hear the knocking. Knock, knock, like it was following me. Like it would never stop. I was falling, not through air, not through water, through something else. Something thicker than darkness. It wasn't just emptiness. It was alive. It wrapped around me, stretching like a vast, unseen current. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't scream, and then I stopped. I wasn't falling anymore. I was standing. Somewhere new, somewhere wrong. The air was cold, but the ground beneath me was warm, like it had been touched by something living. The silence pressed against me, thick as fog, and in front of me a house stood in the dark. It was massive, old but untouched by time. Its wooden frame breathed not literally, but in a way that made my skin crawl. The windows were black, like painted eyes staring out into nothing, and the door tall, narrow, slightly open, as if it had been waiting for me, a house at the bottom of the fall, a house that shouldn't exist, but here it was. And somewhere behind me, I could still hear it knock, knock. I turned. The door I had come through was gone. There was no way back, just endless darkness, stretching forever. I swallowed hard. There was only one choice now. Go inside. The porch creaked beneath my weight. The wood was warm, like something had been standing there before me. I hesitated, but something inside the house shifted. A whisper of movement, something watching, something waiting. The air smelled old like dust, wood, and something damp, something like breath. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house swallowed me whole. The second I crossed the threshold, the air changed. It felt thicker, like stepping into lungs that had been holding breath for too long. The walls stretched up, impossibly high. The ceiling was lost in shadow, and the hallway in front of me, it didn't end, just stretched forward, lined with door after door after door. Each one was closed, except for one, at the very end. It was cracked open, and inside, something shifted. Something moved. I wasn't alone. I took a step forward, then another. The wood groaned underfoot, like the house was reacting to me, like it recognized me. Something moved in the darkness ahead, not a sound, a feeling, the sense of being watched by 1,000 unseen eyes. I reached the door, slowly, carefully. I raised my hand and pushed it open. The room inside was not a room at all. It was a mirror, but not like the one in my apartment. This one was massive, a reflection that stretched the entire length of the space. And inside it, something was waiting, not me, not my reflection, something else. Something that had been watching me fall. Something that had been waiting for me to arrive. Its mouth curled into a smile, and then it spoke. You shouldn't have come here. The house breathed, the walls shifted, and behind me I heard it again. Knock, knock, the words hung in the air. You shouldn't have come here. The voice was neither deep nor high, neither soft nor loud. It was neutral, a tone that belonged to no one and nothing. It came from the mirror, or rather, from the thing inside it. Not me, not a reflection, something else. I stepped closer. The floor groaned beneath my weight. like the house was holding its breath. The figure in the mirror moved with me, but its actions weren't quite right. A fraction of a second too slow. A slight difference in posture. And then I noticed its eyes weren't mine. They were wrong, darker, hollow, too deep, as if they weren't eyes at all, but tunnels leading somewhere else. They watched me without blinking. And when I took another step, the mouth twitched into a smile. A slow, deliberate, knowing grin, like it had been expecting me. Like it had been waiting. I swallowed hard. "Who are you?" I asked. No answer. The figure just stood there, watching. Waiting. The room shifted. Not physically, but spatially. I felt it, the way you feel the air change before a storm. The temperature dropped. The wooden floor felt softer, as if something beneath it was stirring. The walls seemed to breathe in. And then the mirror rippled. It wasn't glass, not anymore. The surface moved, slow and fluid, like water catching the light. And for the first time, the figure inside it moved on its own. Its hands rose, but mine didn't. Its fingers pressed against the other side. And then, very softly, it knocked. Knock, knock. A chill crawled up my spine. I stepped back. The thing in the mirror did not. It leaned closer. The grin widened, too wide now, stretching its face like wet paper. And then, it finally spoke. "You've already let me in." A gust of air rushed past me, whispering against my skin. Behind me, the door slammed shut. I spun around, and when I turned back to the mirror, the figure was gone. But I could still feel it. Watching somewhere, everywhere, the walls shifted again, not visibly, not physically, but I could feel it. The space around me was changing, like the house itself was reacting to what had just happened, or to what had just entered. I wasn't alone anymore, not really, not in the way I had been before. Something else was here now, something that knew me, something that had been waiting. And as I turned back toward the door, one last sound filled the room. Knock. Knock, but this time it wasn't coming from the mirror. It was coming from inside the walls. I didn't move. I couldn't, the sound was still ringing in my ears. Knock, knock, not from the mirror, not from the door, but from inside the walls, as if something was in there, waiting just beneath the surface, and listening. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, different, not just cold, wrong, like the space itself had shifted. I turned toward the door. My fingers hesitated on the handle, my skin tingling as I gripped the metal. Then, slowly, I pushed it open. The hallway beyond was not the same hallway. It should have led back to the main corridor, back to the house I knew. Instead, it stretched out longer, narrower. The walls on either side looked stretched. The wooden panels warped like something had pulled them from the inside. And at the very end, a staircase, one that hadn't been there before. It was old, dusty, the kind of stairs you'd find in an abandoned house, the wood darkened with time and rot. I stepped forward, my breath shallow. Something wasn't right. The air felt thicker as I approached, like walking into a place that didn't want to be disturbed. The first step groaned under my weight. The second did the same. By the third, the air shifted again. And I realized something. I couldn't hear the house anymore. Not the creaks in the wood. Not the wind against the windows. Not the distant hum of the pipes in the walls. Just silence. A silence so deep it felt like a presence itself. Like something was waiting at the top. I kept climbing, step after step, breath shallow, muscles tense. Until finally, I reached the landing and saw the door. It was unlike any door in the house. Old, much older than the rest. The wood was dark and splintered, its surface covered in something that looked like scratches. No, not scratches. Markings, symbols I didn't recognize, carved deep into the grain. Some looked hurried, frantic, like they had been made by someone trying to warn me, or trying to keep something in. I reached for the handle, and the moment my fingers touched it, the knocking started again. Knock, knock, but this time it was coming from the other side. I didn't breathe, didn't blink, I just listened. The knocking was slow, deliberate, not rushed, not desperate, just patient, like whoever, or whatever, was inside knew I would open the door eventually. and was simply waiting for me to do it. I swallowed hard. My fingers tightened around the handle, and then I turned it. The door creaked open, and beyond it was nothing. No room, no walls, no floor, just an endless black void. Not empty, not silent, because something was in it, watching, waiting, and then, from somewhere deep within the dark, knock. Knock, I stepped back. The door slammed shut, and the moment it did, the staircase beneath my feet disappeared. I fell, plunged downward, not into the house, not into a room, but into somewhere else entirely. And as the world around me blurred into darkness, a final thought entered my mind. That staircase, it never led anywhere at all. It only led down. I woke up before I hit the ground, or at least, I think I did. The fall never ended. There was no impact, no pain, no sensation of landing at all. Just a sudden shift. Like waking from a dream without ever realizing you were asleep. And when my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I wasn't outside. I wasn't in my room. I was somewhere else. Somewhere old, somewhere wrong. The floor beneath me was wood, but not like any floor I recognized. It was warped, the boards uneven, some bent at odd angles like they had been forced into place by something that didn't understand how floors were supposed to work. The walls were the same, long, splintering planks, nailed together in patterns that made no sense. There were doors, but they didn't match. Some too tall, some too small, one with a handle in the middle instead of the side, and beyond them, silence. A deep, pressing silence that felt like something was listening to me breathe. I sat up slowly. The air smelled stale, like dust and damp wood, like a place that had been forgotten for a long, long time. I turned my head, scanning the walls. There were no windows, no lights, no visible way out, only the doors and the floor beneath me, the floor that felt wrong, like it wasn't really solid, like it was hiding something. And then I heard it, a whisper, low, soft, muffled, like someone speaking from beneath a thick blanket. I froze. It was coming from the floor, from somewhere just beneath the wooden boards. And the moment I realized that, the whisper stopped. I held my breath. The silence stretched out, heavy and expectant. And then, a new sound, a shift, a slow, deliberate movement. Not the creak of an old house settling, not the scampering of mice. Something big, something alive. Moving directly under me, I scrambled back, pressing against the wall. My pulse hammered in my ears. The floorboards bulged just slightly, like something underneath was pressing against them. And then, a voice. Let me out. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was clear, calm, a voice too human to be safe, too measured to be desperate. I swallowed, forcing my breath to steady. Who's there? I managed. Silence, and then knock, knock. Right beneath my feet. I jumped away. The floorboards where I had been sitting flexed upward, as if something had just punched them from below. A single splintered crack ran down the center. Let me out. The voice again, closer this time. I stumbled back, my shoulder hitting one of the misshapen doors. My breath came shallow and quick. The thing beneath the floor shifted again. It was moving toward me, following me from underneath, and with each movement, the boards creaked and groaned, straining like they were ready to break open. I reached for the door behind me. It had no keyhole, no lock, just a handle, cold and rough under my fingers. I twisted it, and the moment I did, the whisper returned, louder, right against the wood. I see you. The voice wasn't beneath the floor anymore. It was behind the door. I yanked my hand back. My pulse slammed in my throat. The thing beneath the floor pressed up again, harder this time, the crack in the wood spreading wider. I did the only thing I could. I ran. My feet pounded across the warped planks, the doors blurring past me. Behind me, the whispering continued, more voices now, all saying the same thing, let me out, let me out, let me out. The board shuddered, the cracks spreading. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I ran toward the farthest door, the one just barely visible in the dimness. And as I reached for it, the floor beneath me collapsed, and I fell. The last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me was knocking. Knock, 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 not just from the floor, not just from the doors, from everywhere, and then silence. I woke up in freefall. The air rushed past me, cold and damp, but I couldn't see anything, only darkness. It was like falling through the sky at night, except I wasn't outside. I wasn't anywhere. I was just falling. But then I landed, not with a crash, not with pain, just stopped, as if something had caught me, as if I had never really been falling at all. I gasped, my body tensing against the sensation. I was lying on my back now, staring upward, but there was no ceiling. No roof, no sky, just a vast, endless void, black, still, empty, like a night sky without stars, like looking into something that wasn't supposed to exist. I turned my head. The room I had landed in was large, too large. The walls stretched out farther than they should, almost as if the space itself was shifting, growing, breathing. The walls were made of the same warped wood as before, but they twisted unnaturally, stretching upward into the nothingness above. And the floor beneath me, it felt strange, soft like fabric, but when I pressed my palm against it, it was breathing. I shot to my feet. The ground beneath me rose slightly, as if I had just stepped onto something alive. I staggered backward, my heart hammering. The walls moaned, not like wood settling, not like the creaks of an old house. It sounded like voices, distant, echoing, merging together in a low, rhythmic chant. I turned, looking for a way out. And that's when I saw them, the shapes, dark figures standing along the edges of the room, not moving. Not speaking, just watching. I opened my mouth to say something, but I didn't. Something stopped me. A feeling deep in my gut, a warning, don't speak. I swallowed hard, taking slow, careful steps backward. The figures didn't follow. They just stood there, their faces hidden in shadow. And above us, the ceiling that wasn't there stretched forever into the black. A new sound rose from the distance, a slow, rhythmic knocking. Knock, knock. It was above me, but there was nothing above me. Just empty space, just void, and yet the knocking continued, louder now, more insistent. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping my arms to keep myself steady. Then I felt it. Something brushed against my shoulder. I whipped around, but no one was there, not the figures. Not anything, just the darkness, and then the knocking stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Silent, I forced myself to breathe to stay calm, and then a voice, soft, right behind me, look up. I didn't want to. I really didn't want to, but something compelled me. My eyes drifted toward the endless void above, and for the first time I saw something moving, a shape, something crawling. It wasn't a shadow, it wasn't human. It was too long, too thin, and it was coming down. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The thing above me twisted, its limbs bending in impossible angles as it descended. It wasn't falling. It was lowering itself, like a puppet being guided by invisible strings. It had no face, no eyes, no mouth. Just the suggestion of a head, a body, limbs that stretched too far. And worst of all, it was knocking. Its hand, or whatever passed for a hand, tapped lightly against the air, as if it was knocking on a door that wasn't there. Knock, knock. I wanted to run. I wanted to move, but my body wouldn't listen. The figure kept descending, slow and deliberate, its knock growing louder. And then it spoke, not from a mouth, not from a face, but from everywhere, from the walls, from the breathing floor. From the darkness above, let me in. I clamped my hands over my ears. The voices from the walls rose in unison, chanting, repeating, let me in, let me in, let me in. The knocking became pounding, and then the void above me cracked open, and something fell through. I didn't see what it was. I didn't have time, because the moment the crack split wide, I felt myself being pulled upward. Gravity shifted, the floor fell away, and I was ripped into the darkness. I was falling again, but this time it felt different. Before, there had been air rushing past me, the sensation of movement, of descent. Now, there was nothing. No wind, no sound, no sense of up or down, just falling, through emptiness, through something that wasn't space, wasn't sky. Just absence, like I had slipped between the cracks of reality itself. Then I landed, but not hard. Not like hitting solid ground. I landed as if something had placed me down gently, as if I had never really been falling at all. I gasped, inhaling deep, cool air, and opened my eyes. I was standing in a field. The grass beneath my feet was long, silver, tipped, and swayed even though there was no wind. The sky above me was wrong. It wasn't blue, it wasn't black. It was a deep, endless gray, like the color of an old mirror. Clouds didn't move, stars didn't shine. It was still, like a frozen picture of a sky that had been abandoned. Like something left unfinished. In the distance, something stood alone. A house, small, old, too far away to make out details, but its silhouette was sharp. Perfect, like it didn't belong in this place. Like it had been cut out of reality and pasted here. I took a step forward. The grass whispered under my feet. Then another step, then another, and then the knocking began. Knock. Knock. I froze. The sound didn't come from behind me, not from above, not from some unseen place. It came from the house. I turned toward it, squinting through the eerie gray light. I could see it more clearly now. A small, wooden cabin. No lights, no movement, just standing there, waiting. And then knock, knock. I swallowed. My chest felt tight. Like something in the air was pressing against me, telling me to leave, but there was nowhere to go. Only the endless field behind me, only the still, silent sky above, and the house, waiting. I stepped forward. As I moved, details sharpened. The wood of the house was aged and cracked, but had no dust, no cobwebs. The front door had no handle, no knob, just a smooth, dark surface. The windows were covered in thick, black curtains. And the roof, it wasn't there. It just ended, like someone had started building the house and then forgotten to finish it. I stepped closer, and the knocking came again. Knock, knock. I exhaled slowly. Then, carefully, I raised my fist, and I knocked back. Knock, knock. Silence. No response. I waited. I knew something was inside. Something had been knocking first. But the moment I responded, it stopped. I pressed my ear against the door. Nothing. Not a sound. But as I reached for the edge of the doorframe, my fingers brushed against something. A piece of paper, folded, tucked into the crack between the wood. I pulled it free, unfolded it. There were only 2 words. Scrawled in black ink. Rushed, desperate, turn around. My breath hitched. The air around me felt thicker. Like the world itself was holding its breath. I knew I shouldn't. I knew. But something compelled me. Slowly I turned. The field was gone. No more grass. No more endless space. No more silent gray sky. Instead, a long, endless hallway, made of dark wood, stretching infinitely in both directions. No doors. No windows, no way out. Just one thing, one figure, standing in the distance, facing me, waiting. And even though it was too far away to see clearly, I knew it was knocking. Knocking on the air, knocking on something I couldn't see. And then it took a step forward. The figure in the distance was still. But I could feel it watching me. I could hear it. Not a voice, not a breath, but knocking. Not against a wall. Not against a door. It was knocking on the air itself. Knock, knock. 2 slow, deliberate taps, just like before. Then silence. Then another step forward. I turned back to the cabin. The note was still clenched in my fingers. Turn around I had, and now I was trapped. No open sky, no endless field. Just a hallway stretching infinitely in both directions. And a figure in the distance, growing closer. I reached for the door, and it opened by itself. A deep, slow creak as the wooden door swung inward. Not by force, not by the wind, by its own will, beyond it. Darkness, a pitch, black space, so thick it looked solid. Not empty, not hollow, like stepping inside meant being swallowed whole. But the hallway behind me stretched forever, and the figure wasn't stopping. I had no choice. I stepped inside. The moment I did, the door slammed shut. I was blind, no light, no walls I could feel, no sound except my own breathing. But after a few seconds, I realized I wasn't alone. Something was in here with me, something standing just a few feet away. I felt it before I saw it, a presence. A heavy, watching presence. Then, out of the darkness, a faint, glowing outline, a door, no walls, no floor. Just a single door, standing in nothingness. Its frame glowed dimly, like embers in the dark. It had no handle. No knob, only a single keyhole. And as I stared at it, something inside knocked. Knock, knock, slow. Deep, like something inside the door wanted to get out. I took a step closer. The wood of the door looked ancient, cracked with age, but smooth. Like it had been used many, many times. I reached out, pressed my fingers against it, and the moment I did, a cold breath touched my ear. A whisper curling into my mind like a thread of smoke. A voice, soft, distant. "It's not locked." I froze. The voice wasn't outside the door, it was behind me. I turned instinctively, but there was nothing. Only blackness, only silence, only that lingering, cold breath vanishing into the air. Then the door creaked open. A small gap, a sliver of space, revealing another hallway. Not the infinite, empty corridor from before. This one was narrow, wood, paneled walls lined with framed portraits, and at the very end, a single light. Glowing, flickering, waiting, I hesitated, then stepped through, and as I crossed the threshold, the door shut behind me. Gone, vanished, like it had never been there at all. The hallway was silent. Dust floated in the dim glow, dancing in the air like ghostly remnants of something long forgotten. The portraits along the walls were old, yellowed, faded, yet somehow I could feel eyes watching me. Even though the faces were blurred, even though the details were smeared, like someone had erased them. The air was thick with something heavy, something unspoken, like the walls themselves were holding a secret. And then from somewhere deep within the house a sound, a new sound, not a knock, not a whisper, something worse. A second door creaking open. I turned my head slowly. The hallway stretched on, narrowing into darkness, but I could hear it. Wood groaning, hinges bending, a door, somewhere out of sight, unlocking itself, opening for me, and I wasn't sure if I had any choice but to enter. The hallway narrowed as I walked. The air was thick, still, like the house itself was holding its breath. The light at the end of the corridor flickered, barely illuminating the space ahead. And then I saw it. A door, slightly open, waiting, but something felt wrong. This door wasn't like the others. The frame curved unnaturally, almost bending into the walls like it had been forced into place. And the space beyond, it wasn't darkness. It was moving, shifting, like something inside was breathing. Or waiting. I stepped closer, and the air around me turned cold. There was a feeling I couldn't shake. Like I had been here before. Like I had opened this door already. But that wasn't possible. I reached out, pressed my palm against the wood. It was warm, not from the house, not from the air, from something on the other side. And then a whisper, right against the door, muffled, indistinct, a voice I almost recognized, my own. I pulled my hand back immediately. The whispering stopped, but the door, it was still open, just a crack. I shouldn't have gone inside. I should have turned around, but the hallway behind me was gone. No walls, no portraits, just empty space stretching into the abyss. The house wasn't letting me leave, not yet. I took a breath and stepped through. The moment I crossed the threshold, my ears rang. A deep, vibrating hum filled the air like I had stepped inside a space that wasn't meant to exist. The floor beneath me shifted. Wood planks rippled like water, reforming the moment I stepped forward. And the walls, they were covered in mirrors, dozens of them, each one reflecting something different. Not me, not exactly. They reflected versions of me, some older, some younger, some with expressions I had never made. Eyes that weren't mine, lips moving in whispers I couldn't hear. I turned and saw the door I entered through was gone. I wasn't alone, I could feel it. Something else was in the room, something watching me. I looked at the mirrors again, and one reflection didn't match. My back was turned, but in one mirror my reflection faced me, staring, not moving, not blinking, just waiting. And then it raised its hand, a slow, deliberate motion, and pointed, not at me, at something behind me. I turned, there was nothing. Only the room, only the mirrors, only the sound of my own breathing and the whisper that followed. Right against my ear, soft, familiar, "You're almost there." A hand pressed against my back, not to hurt me, not to push me, to guide me. And I knew if I turned around again, something would be standing there. I stepped forward instead, and the moment I did, a door appeared in front of me, the only real door. Old wood, no handle, just a single, silver keyhole. And from the other side, a deep, resonating knock. Knock, knock, waiting, calling. I took a breath and reached for it. The door stood in front of me. Old, solid wood. No handle, no knob, only a keyhole, and from the other side. Knock, knock. A slow, deliberate sound. Not impatient, not rushed. It was waiting for me, for something I didn't understand yet. I reached into my pocket, almost on instinct. I don't know why I expected to find something, but I did. A key, small, cold, the metal unfamiliar but worn smooth, like it had been used 1,000 times before. Like it had always been mine, but I didn't remember ever having it. I turned it over in my fingers, feeling the weight of it. And the moment it touched my palm, a voice whispered from the other side of the door. Faint, muffled. You know what to do." I didn't, not really, but something inside me, deep inside me, did. I raised the key, slid it into the lock, and as soon as I did, I heard breathing, not mine, something slow, something heavy, something right against the door, waiting. I should have turned around, should have left, but I didn't. I couldn't. I turned the key, and the door swung open. At first there was nothing, just an empty, endless darkness. A space that felt too big to be real, too quiet, too vast, like I had just opened the door to something infinite. But then a light flickered in the distance, faint, distant, like a candle struggling to stay lit. I stepped forward. The floor beneath me was cold stone now, not wood, and my footsteps echoed, like I had just entered a space that shouldn't exist. A tunnel, a long one, leading somewhere I had been before, somewhere I had tried to forget. As I walked, the walls began to change. At first they were bare stone, then they weren't. They were covered in pictures, frames nailed haphazardly to the surface, each one containing a photograph of me, but they weren't memories. They were things that hadn't happened yet, moments that felt inevitable. And as I moved deeper into the tunnel, the photographs started to move. Not just still images, living moments, like windows into my future. Things I didn't want to see, things I couldn't stop. One showed me standing in a field, staring at a house I didn't recognize. Another, digging, deep into the ground, dirt clinging to my hands. My expression blank, my eyes unfocused. A third, a figure standing outside my window, watching me sleep. And in the reflection of the glass, my own face, looking back. But my eyes weren't blinking. I stopped walking. Because ahead of me one last picture was waiting. It was different, bigger, the frame old and cracked, like it had been there the longest. I stepped closer, feeling something cold wash over me. And when I looked at the image, I understood. It was the front door of my house, and standing in front of it, in the middle of the night, was me. Hand raised, knocking, twice, knock, knock, and behind me, inside the house, someone was standing in the hallway, watching me through the peephole, waiting to let me in. A whisper came from the darkness, soft, familiar. You know what to do." And before I could move, the ground beneath me collapsed, and I was falling into something I couldn't escape, something I had already lived, something that was about to begin again. I woke up gasping, cold air, the feeling of weightlessness still clinging to me, as if I had truly fallen, as if I had landed somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. But I wasn't in the tunnel anymore. I wasn't in my house either. I was somewhere else, somewhere wrong. The first thing I noticed was the silence, thick, heavy, like sound didn't belong here. Even my own breath felt muted, like the world itself had been hollowed out. I sat up slowly, my hands pressing against the surface beneath me, smooth. Hard, not wood, not stone, something else, something cold. And when I looked around, I realized where I was. It was my house, but not my house. The same walls, the same furniture, the same dim light filtering through the curtains. But everything felt off, like I was standing inside a reflection of my home, not the real thing. Like it had been recreated from memory, but not my memory. And then I saw it, the door, the same one I had unlocked, the same one I had stepped through, only now it was closed again, and on this side there was no keyhole, no way to open it. And when I reached out, pressing my fingers against the wood, it was warm, not like something heated from the inside, but like something was breathing against it, something on the other side, waiting. Knock, knock. I froze. The sound didn't come from behind the door. It came from inside the house, somewhere down the hall. Slow, deliberate. I turned my head, pulse hammering in my ears, and there, at the end of the hallway, a figure stood, watching me. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't someone unknown. It was me, standing in the dark, face half hidden in the shadows, eyes unblinking, expression unreadable. And then I saw his hand rise, slow, almost casual, and he knocked. Knock, knock. I took a step back. The air around me felt heavy now, thick like water, like the very walls of the house were pushing in. And the other me, he didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe, just stood there, waiting. And that's when I understood. I had been on both sides of this door. I had been the one knocking, and now I was the one listening. But which one of us was real? Which side of the door was the right one? I didn't know anymore, and maybe I never had. I didn't move. The other me didn't move either. We stood at opposite ends of the hallway, a mirror without glass, a reflection without a surface. I didn't dare breathe too loud, because if I did, would he do it too? Would I hear his breath, a fraction too late, like an echo that shouldn't exist? Would his chest rise and fall just out of sync with mine? Would he smile? Would I? Knock, knock. My pulse slammed against my ribs. The sound hadn't come from him. This time it came from behind me, the door, the one I had stepped through, the one that no longer had a keyhole. I turned my head slowly. The wood was still warm beneath my fingertips. But now there were handprints forming, dozens of them, spreading outward, fingers pressing against the surface from the other side. Not trying to get in, trying to get out. I spun back to the hallway, but the other me was gone. The end of the hallway was empty. The space where he had been felt wrong, like something had just stepped out of place. Like a puzzle piece had been lifted from reality, leaving a gap where it used to belong. I wasn't alone in this house. I knew that now. I never had been. And I had the awful feeling that I was not supposed to be here. I stepped back, pressing myself against the door. It felt too solid now, too real, like it wasn't a way out at all. Like it had never been a door in the first place. And then, the house breathed. A low, hollow exhale, like wind moving through unseen spaces. The walls shifted, just slightly, just enough for me to know they weren't walls at all. Something had built this place. Something that understood what a house was supposed to look like, but had never lived in one. Like a stage set, painted and arranged to feel familiar. But it wasn't, not really. I wasn't in my home. I was somewhere else, somewhere built for me, and now I had the terrible feeling that the architect had noticed I was here. Footsteps, soft, measured, coming from the hallway, but not from the floor, from the walls, moving inside them. Not approaching, circling, like something was waiting for me to move first. My breath hitched. I forced my body to stay still, because something told me it could only see movement. That was why it had built this place so carefully. Why it had made it feel almost real, so that I would wander, so that I would move, and the moment I did, it would know exactly where I was. I stood there, frozen. The walls creaked as if shifting in place. The air pressed heavy against my skin. The only way out was forward, but forward meant moving. Forward meant being seen. Forward meant stepping deeper into a house that wasn't mine. And I wasn't sure I would ever find my way out again. I didn't want to move, but the walls did. They shifted in a way that wasn't natural. Not like wood settling, not like an old house breathing with the wind. This wasn't a house, not really. It had walls, it had a floor, it had a ceiling, but all of it felt alive, and worse, it was watching me. The footsteps inside the walls had stopped, but the presence behind them hadn't left. I could feel it now. A weight, a pressure, like unseen eyes pressing into my skin, not human, not anything I could name. But it knew I was here, it had always known, and it was waiting. I turned my head slightly. My eyes scanned the hallway. There were no windows, there were no doors, only the long, stretching corridor that shouldn't exist. I had been in my apartment, I had stepped into my hallway, but this was something else. I took a careful step forward. The floor groaned, not wood creaking, something beneath it shifting. Something moving just under the surface. Like a heartbeat or a breath, my skin crawled. I wanted to turn back, but the door was gone now, vanished. As if it had never been there at all. I kept walking, one step, then another. The hallway didn't end. It just kept going, like I wasn't getting anywhere, like I was walking in place, and then the walls shuddered. Not a noise, not a creak, a movement, like something inside them had shifted. I felt my stomach drop, because I understood something, in that awful, creeping way that seeps into your bones before your mind catches up. The walls weren't watching me, they were hiding something, something that didn't need doors, something that didn't need a way in because it was already inside. A whisper, soft, almost a breath, too low to understand, but it was close, too close. I turned my head, and for just a second I saw it. Not a person, not a shadow, just a shape, moving behind the wall like it wasn't solid. Not bound by wood, not bound by anything. It tilted its head, watching me, waiting, and then it smiled. My breath caught in my throat. The wall bulged, like something pressing forward from inside. The outline of a face not human. Not right, mouth too wide, teeth too sharp, pressing outward, straining, like it wanted to push through. Like it could, and all it needed was for me to take one more step. I stepped back instead. The wall went still. The smile faded, but the presence didn't leave. I had the feeling it never did, never would. This place belonged to it. And I was just passing through, if I was lucky, if I made it out. The hallway stretched on ahead of me. Endless, silent, watching. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. And something told me I was never leaving. Not unless I found a way out before it decided that it didn't want me to. The hallway stretched endlessly. Every step I took felt meaningless, swallowed by the space itself. I wasn't getting anywhere, but I had to keep moving. The thing in the walls hadn't left. It had only paused, like it was waiting, like it was giving me a chance. Or maybe letting me believe I had one. The air changed, thicker, like I was wading through something unseen, pushing against a force that wanted me to stop. The walls shivered, not a trick of my eyes, not a flicker of movement in the dimness. The actual, physical walls moved, like they were adjusting, shaping themselves for what, for who. Then I saw it, a door, at the end of the hall. It shouldn't have been there. I had walked for too long in a space that had no end, and yet there it was. Waiting for me. I didn't trust it, but I didn't trust anything here, so I kept moving, closer, step by step, until I could make out the details. It wasn't like the other doors in my apartment building. Old, heavy wood. Carved patterns that I almost recognized, like something I'd seen in a dream, but could never quite remember. And the handle, it was warm, like someone had just touched it. I hesitated. Behind me, the walls gave a soft, slow creak. A reminder, a warning. I wasn't alone. I never had been. And whatever was watching me from behind those walls, it didn't want me standing here. It wanted me to choose, to open the door or stay. Stay forever. I turned the handle. It didn't resist. The door swung open, and what was on the other side was impossible. I should have seen my apartment. I should have seen something that made sense. Instead, I saw a forest. Tall, skeletal trees stretching into the night sky. A pale mist curled through the air, and far in the distance something moved, slow, deliberate, a shape too large to be human. Watching me, a sharp knock rang behind me. Twice. The sound sent ice through my veins. I turned my head, and the hallway was gone. The door I had stepped through no longer led to my apartment, no longer led to anywhere I recognized. Only the trees, the mist, and the thing waiting in the dark. I looked back. The door was still there, standing alone, like a wound in reality, a doorway leading to nowhere, or maybe leading back home. Another knock from the other side, slow, measured, not a request, a command. A cold whisper slid through the trees, step away from the door. I swallowed hard. My heart pounded. I had a choice. Go back through or step forward, into the dark. The door handle twisted. Something was coming. I didn't have time. I had to decide now. And I had a terrible feeling that whatever choice I made, I wasn't getting out of this untouched. The handle twisted. Something on the other side was about to step through, and I knew, deep in my bones, that I couldn't let that happen. I turned. The forest stretched before me, endless and waiting. Mist curled between the trees like living veins. The figure in the distance had stopped moving, watching, waiting. It didn't chase. It didn't need to. It knew something I didn't. It knew what I would do next. A third knock, boom, 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 not two. 3, wrong, wrong. The knock had always been twice. I wasn't the only one making a choice anymore. Something else had decided too. I gritted my teeth and moved, forward, away from the door, away from whatever was about to step through. Into the forest, into its world. The air shifted, the trees stretched, the figure in the mist turned. It was waiting for me, and deep in my gut, I knew I had never had a choice, not really, because the knocking hadn't been a warning, hadn't been a ghost, hadn't been some cosmic mistake. It had been an invitation, and tonight, for the first time, I had answered. Behind me, the door slammed shut, a final deafening boom, and when I turned back, it was gone. No door. No way home, just the forest, the mist, and the thing waiting for me in the dark. The knocking has stopped. Because I am where I was always meant to be, and something else has taken my place. The end.